We rolling. Today we are with Steve Lowery in his studio in Birmingham, Alabama. Steve, where are you originally from?
I was born here. This is my hometown. Glad to be home.
All right. And went to high school here?
Went to minor high school west of town. Yep.
All right.
Graduated in '68 and went to New York the day after I graduated.
All right. What prompted that?
I got a scholarship to go to art school there. I've been playing in the clubs and beer joints and rib houses all over the state and traveled a good bit and worked with some of the best musicians going. I was very blessed early on and walked away from it to go to New York to become an artist.
Okay. And who'd you play with up there?
Well, I played here with, we had the Boutwell guys, Ed Massey, Perkins, Charles Fullilove, Mike Lawley. There were so many great musicians. A lot of them still around and playing. Some of them unfortunately not here. Tippy Armstrong, the whole Boutwell studio gang. We had probably 6 clubs running full time with house bands all over the city, and it was a wonderful time to be a musician.
Okay. And then New York. How did you get into that scene?
Well, I got a scholarship. I went up the day I turned 17. I sold all my gear and went up and told myself, if you're going to do it, find out if you're going to be any good. So I buckled up and went up, and I had the great fortune to study with 5 of the greatest artists that ever lived: Bob Peak and Saul Bass and Stephen Kidd and Paul de Medici and sculptors and abstract painter. I studied everything. Became friends with a lot of great painters. Salvador Dali was a running buddy off and on for about 3 years. I did his portrait. There's just tons of stories and great memories of my early years in New York. They built me. They were the greatest times really of my life.
All right. Give us one of those stories. We won't ask for all of them. But...
Well, I got a job in a bookstore because I felt kind of insecure. I didn't have the history of art knowledge that a lot of the young students did. I could draw pretty well. I started drawing when I was 4, and it's always been pretty much my language. I spent a lot of time alone. I was an Air Force brat, and we traveled a lot, so my art was my pretty much self-contained world, and I love to draw anything and everything. I'd draw I remember my mother wiping my drawings off the refrigerator, front of the refrigerator when I was 3, 4. And it just seemed like that's what you should do. It felt natural and normal. I had an high school art teacher who took an interest in me and wanted to get me out of the beer joints because I was the only one in the band that stayed in school. And she told me, she said, "Look, I'm going to find a way to get you out of those places." And I got a scholarship. I loved playing in the band. Some of the best friends and relationships. I went to see Henry Lavoie last night, who's probably played longer in the clubs than anybody I know. I think it's 54 years he's been a club musician. He's one of the great drummers and singers, and it's always a homecoming to go see my friends.
Who taught you to play?
Our bass player got drafted, and overnight I became the bass player. Charles Fullilove showed me a little bit, and how I learned was pretty much osmosis. All the old WVOK radio shows bands used to play at Boutwell. Well, they'd come down the street to the Starlight Lounge or Charlie Brown's or wherever we were, and if you didn't know how to play their music, and most of these guys had played on the records that the music we were playing. The only real bass lesson I had, we were playing Land of a Thousand Dances, or no, Funky Broadway, excuse me. And this guy was in the club, and he came up and he said, "Hey, that ain't working." And I've been playing about 2 weeks. And he said, "Those 16th notes," I didn't even know what he was talking about. Well, they get up the next set and he plays it. And I'm going, "Man, that's close to the record." He said, "Yeah, I just played on the record. It was Tommy Cogbill." That was the only real bass lesson. The rest of it, it was just sitting with 45s that you got from Rumor's record rack and playing them over and over again. I got a pretty good ear and time and a meter and all that stuff worked out. We had a great drummer to work with. Ed Massey was about as good as I played with. Later on played with Wayne Perkins and Topper Price and those guys. But one interesting story is in 1973 I took a lot of my jazz loving friends. I was doing a lot of work with CBS Records at the time, and there were 2 bands at the Schaefer Music Festival in Central Park. So I took about 8 friends, and they're all kind of, this is cornball, they sleep under the porch down there, there's no real music. Well, it was Cowboy opened for the Allman Brothers, and that was the night I met Tommy Talton and Scott Boyer, and they were absolutely magic. The next day, every man that went with me to a person went to Sam Goody and bought both bands' albums. It became a relationship that I still share with Tommy and Scott. I was up at the Nut House about 5 months ago and did some drawings for a CD project they were working on, and they were pretty much the poet laureates of Southern music, if you want to limit it to that. I never bought the Southern music thing. I think it's just music. I think the musicians in this part of the country are as good as anybody, better than most in the whole world.
I'll agree with that wholeheartedly. And New York, how'd you blossom there to meet all the people that you did?
Well, it's access, luck, and timing, and putting yourself in the right place and being ready. I left after the first year of a 4-year scholarship. My wife at the time became ill, and it was time to get out and find out if I could really make it. We were, young, broke, starving, the young and the rentless, or whatever you want to call it. I beat the streets for about 5 months, and then the art director at the New York Times took an interest in what I was doing. And it took off from there. A year later, I was doing work with Madison Square Garden, the New York Times, the New York Yankees. I had probably 24 clients, and it was every day I would get in, and the more you do, the better you get. And I fell in love with it. I wasn't much of a sports fan until all that hit. And then I did 26 title fights for Madison Square Garden, worked a lot with Muhammad Ali's people, Joe Frazier, Larry Holmes. We did a lot of work in Las Vegas and Puerto Rico with Don King. I worked with him off and on 16 title fights. It was just the best time in American sports. And I think I grew up in the best time of American music. I'm very respectful of what's going on today, but back then there was just music that's timeless. The Aaron Nevilles, the Candyman. I met Wayne Perkins at the Porto Armory we both showed up to watch Billy Joe Royal, Tommy Rowe, the Candyman, and Joe South. And that's about as good as it gets for a guy from my part of the country. I love all those Dothan players. John O'Reilly Atkins was my hero, one of the great guitar players. And to this day, Rodney Justo's still out singing with the Atlanta Rhythm Section, which is an offshoot of the Candyman. We talk online and in person often, and it's a real treat. I saw them at Steve Paul's Scene in New York right after I got there, and they were one of the absolute best heralded Southern bands ever.
You've got Buddy Buey in that line.
Oh, Buddy. Oh, all those guys. I was in Dothan about 3 years ago for the Bama Jam, and a friend of mine took me downtown to see all the murals of all my heroes, and it was very emotional because that was my groundwork. Seeing all of them, we got a deal with Bill Lowery, no relation to me, ABC Records, and there was just so much going on in those days. There was a real sense of energy. You had Glenn Wood and the studios. Everybody was doing great work, and just the quality of musicians.
Yeah, I happened to see Miles Davis' movie last night. And you knew Miles.
Yeah, I worked 2 tours, the Bitches Brew tour and the Tutu tour. I spent an afternoon with him in his studio in New York. We drew each other. Those are great memories. He was always I kept my distance because he was always on edge about just life in general. He was very protective of himself. But when he found out I was an artist, he took an interest in me. In fact, he had 2 of my pieces. One I gave him, and then he bought one at one of my shows. I called him Galileo one afternoon, and he gave me this look. I said, "Well, because you take this stuff where nobody ever goes." And from then on, we were pretty good. I knew him off and on for probably 12 years or so, and I'd see him in Central Park or at various clubs or in the studio. I became friends with Joe Zawinul and Arc Records through Maurice White. I met Maurice because of my relationship with one of the great Birmingham musicians, Cleveland Eaton. They had played on Ramsey Lewis's The In Crowd together. Cleve had played bass and Maurice had played drums. And when I brought that up, it kind of gave us this kinship. The beauty of music is it brings people together, like us all together from very different backgrounds, races, creeds, all this business. It's kind of an amalgamation of respectful people of what we do. I'm anxious to go see Cleve. I heard he'd been ill again, and he's one of my big heroes. He was my neighbor for many years, and I try to see him as often as I can. He's one of the great American legends in music for my money.
Okay. How close was the movie to Miles in real life?
Well, it's kind of off and on, hit and miss. I have a great respect for Don Cheadle. I thought he did a great job. I've read most of the press, pro and con, with it. I think he has, as any filmmaker does, I think he has his vision. I think it was kind of what Miles did with that Cyndi Lauper song. I think he kind of took it and made it his own. I think it was brilliant. I think it was a very brave move. I'm surprised a major movie company would put something like that, because it is a limited market. It's not going to be Shrek or anything, but it's a film that I wholly support. I've seen it twice, and I think Don Cheadle should be saluted. I'd love to see him win whatever awards that come his way. I think he deserves. It's a very brave movie.
Okay. And out of all your accomplishments, which ones that comes to the top of your mind?
My son Aaron. I named my son after Joseph Zawinul and Aaron Neville. And he is that's the one great thing. And I was 42 when he came, and it changed my universe. I think it made me a better artist, better musician, better human being. Artistically, the Dali thing was close. In 1976, I was the youngest artist in 200 years of American illustration. They picked the top 100 artists in American history for the bicentennial. And I was 26 at the time, and the youngest artist there, and I went in with all my teachers were there, and it was a very, very wonderful afternoon. I still remember it. Musically, there's so many. The Weather Report tour, the Led Zeppelin tour I photographed was great. The Fillmore East, I probably did at least 90 shows in the 3-4 years that the Fillmore was running. I saw everybody. The drawing over there, I did a Jimi Hendrix. I was sitting third row center for the 69-70 show. That was probably the best single last show, the 1970 show I've ever seen. He was just head and shoulders, but all those shows were wonderful. It was just a wonderful world. When I went to New York the first year, I made it a point to go to Greenwich Village, and all the clubs, the Village Vanguard, all of them were running. There was music everywhere. And there was a real sense of community. There was a real sense of this hippie thing that everybody talks about. It was real. I had a lot of great friendships. If somebody was in need, maybe the people around them would take care of them. There was a real spirit of taking care of each other, and everybody was scared to death of Vietnam, and it kind of brought everybody together. But there are so many things. I mean, New York was just a cascade of great events. I remember one week I was in Las Vegas, New York, Montreal for the Duran fight, back to New York, to Panama with Roberto, then to Puerto Rico for a fight, then back to New York in a week. That was doing stuff with ABC Sports and Don King, and it was just I was glad I was half my age to be able to do it, because it was a real grind, but I was simply in love with it. Whole years went by, and I had reams of work and a lot of great memories. I left at 40, came back 42 actually, and came back south. Decided I wanted to be around the people I grew up with. The speed of this part of the country appealed to me. So many of my friends I lost through the music wars, as we call them, and just wanted to come home, and I'm very happy to be home, very proud. I just moved back from New Orleans about 8 months ago here in Birmingham, and very excited, very hopeful for the future. I think there's a lot of great things going on in the city of Birmingham right now. A lot of people with the want to and the finances to make things happen here, and I'm very, very hopeful for the future of this city.
Okay, and you just had a show in New Orleans.
Yeah, I had 26 pieces. Went real well. We had a big following. I ran into a lot of the people I had painted. Musicians and a lot of artist friends showed up. New Orleans is a wonderful place. It's just not my home, and I'm very, very happy to be back in my hometown.
Okay, where do you see the future for Steve Lowery?
Healthy, happy. I've got a good woman in my life, and she's a big part of what I do. And I think I'm controlled more by my heart and my spirit than my mind. Maybe that doesn't work in the financial end sometimes, but I think the closer you are to what means to you, the better a life you have. And hopefully will do important work that means something to people, that touches people. I can remember songs that I heard when I was 15. I'm 66 now. I can remember 51 years ago hearing a song and remember the whole song, and that's how much they get inside you. So just want to do good work and be respected by my peers and cared about by my community and make a contribution and try to, like my dear late friend Alan Toussaint used to say, try to make a better world.
All right. Well, appreciate it, Steve.
Thank you, Jerry. Welcome anytime.
Okay.